right? So like I said, you are welcome to stick with your primary colors. You are absolutely welcome to incorporate some black and white in there. That's totally fine too. Try to use the black and white as least as you possibly can. I'd highly suggest you have some kind of paper towel or some kind of random cloth or something, because really you shouldn't need to be mixing or kind of like using water with this project. Straight paint is absolutely fine, because the twist, who didn't see this coming, we're not using paintbrushes at all for this assignment. You are not using your paintbrushes at all. We are only using palette knives, or really anything. If you want to use a random stick you found on the ground, cool. Hunk of cardboard, awesome. Fingers. Use fingers. You can finger paint like you did in kindergarten. That's all fine. You are not allowed to use a paintbrush. Random hunk of cardboard. This corrugated cardboard is going to give you a pretty gnarly texture. You might want that, right? You are more than welcome to use some weird out there thing. The only thing you're not allowed to do is use paintbrush. If it is, that paint's way too thin, okay? So it's on there, just looks like some goopy like pudding mess, right? And I can apply it, I can think about the different ways that you can apply something, right? So I can apply it, I can press on my canvas and kind of do a little pull, a little stroke. You can kind of hear how it grinds on that canvas, right? I can literally just press almost like a stamp, and that's going to give me a totally different texture, almost like leaf veins, like kind of gummy looking, right? So that's an idea. Another way I can go is I can actually scoop my paint. So I'm going to brush my my little guy off here so I can start clean. Okay, we'll do a different color. So I can actually scoop my paint. We'll do like blue here. So now it's like a spoon, right? Now I've got some on the top and very, very little on the bottom, right? Very little on the bottom. So with that in mind, I can come over to my paintbrush, or to my palette, excuse me. And again, the same brush strokes, but look at how much less paint I'm getting on there, because it's not on that side. What happens if I turn my brush, or my palette knife? Now I'm gonna mush it in, so I've got a little bit more to go. It's kind of a reservoir, it's kind of hanging on, like a soup spoon or something, right? I'm kind of hanging onto that paint. I can't necessarily push as much, I'm getting big droopies going on, but the same techniques, right? But holding that paint in a slightly different way. One last little technique that you probably want to be aware of. You can use the edge of your actual palette knife, right? So not the bottom, not the top, but just the edge, and kind of like karate chop. Okay, like you're like Scarface over here, right? So kind of like get it just on the edge right there, right? And again, same techniques, right? I can stroke, I can kind of push, right? So I'm getting very different marks, but they're all basically the same idea, right? They're all basically the same idea. Now imagine for a second, what happens if I start mixing and matching? What if I apply paint, right? But while it's still wet, again, this thing's metal, right? Well, what if I start scraping away, right? I can actually take paint off of my canvas. What if I scrape off a whole bunch of paint right there, right? So I can work on how I apply it and cutting it in different directions. I can get a whole bunch of different styles very quickly, right? By the fact that this is able to kind of cut into that paint, right? So unlike a paintbrush, where you'd be kind of mixing on the canvas, if I have different colors, with a paintbrush I'd be kind of swirling them around, they would start to blend and mix. I can actually like erase almost with this thing. I can literally like remove paint, let that dry, put something else on top of it. It's very, very flat. I can actually scrape that paint right off of there, okay? So that's something to think about. Again, think about different materials. What if I'm going to use something that's not a palette knife, right? So something like this, I'm not going to be scared of this corrugated side. I want to utilize that. It's so gnarly and gross. This is going to do something cool. I'm not exactly sure what, but we can find out. So go ahead, think about how you're going to actually scoop up the paint, just like with the palette knife. Am I dipping? Am I scraping? Like, what am I going to get into? So let's see. I'm just going to kind of get it in here a little bit. What if I get more than one color going on? So a little bit of yellow, a little bit of blue. Now I've got yellow and blue on the same side going on, right? They're not mixed necessarily, not mixed. Just kind of scooping it up on there. Okay, let's see what happens. Sometimes just experimenting gives you something cool, and sometimes it doesn't. So that's giving me kind of a neat, kind of rustic-y edge. But if I go over it a second time, third time, fourth time, fifth time, sixth time, seventh time, eventually that yellow and that blue, I'm getting a pretty good green right in the middle there, right? It's kind of blending and mixing directly on the canvas. Not happy with it. let it dry, instead of getting frustrated, right? Let it dry, paint over top of it. Because there's only one thing you should not do when it comes to painting with a palette knife, or really painting in general, but painting with a palette knife especially. It is going to be tempting to just keep layering and layering and layering wet paint on top of wet paint on top of wet paint. And at a certain point, and you'll feel it, it's going to happen to every single one of you, at a certain point you'll feel it where it kind of becomes this like mess, right? Where you're kind of scraping paint and applying paint, and pretty soon it just becomes this like, what is that? I don't even know what that is anymore, right? I've just lost it, right? If you lose it, instead of getting frustrated, it's going to happen. Instead of getting frustrated, stop, let it dry, right? Scoop up some paint and start again. Jump in. So think about kind of a shrub, right? We're just going to say maybe it's, let's see, something kind of over here. We'll say it's kind of hanging off the page a little bit, right? Something in there. So I'm going to imagine the light source is coming kind of in this direction. So I'm just going to kind of get in here. I'm just placing kind of randomly. No real rhyme or reason to it. You can scrape, you can cut, do a whole bunch of different techniques. It's going to be messy, it's going to be abstract, it's going to feel awkward. That's okay. Jump over to my next color here. All right, get some other colors. I'm painting wet on wet, directly over top. Right? If I wanted smaller, brush strokes, so to say, if I wanted something kind of a little bit less chunky than what I'm doing right now, get a smaller palette knife or a smaller stick, or like, what if you painted landscape but you only used landscape objects? So your entire painting was painted with like twigs that you found. So you're painting twigs with twigs. I don't know, maybe not, maybe that's weird, don't do that. I don't know. Again, just a little bit here, get some of that darker color in there, get it on there, glob it on. Look here, let's go crazy. Like just go up, get it on there. Get some paint. Right? Glob it on. Maybe like get a little bit of blue in there, mix some on your palette. Oh yeah. Right? Some deep, heavy kind of shadows in there. This is going to be absolutely out of your comfort zone. Like there's no doubt this is going to be like awkward, because this is really the opposite of what I've been training you to do so far. But sometimes learning the opposite, and then you come back and you start saying, okay, well now I want to go back and paint a still life. Now I want to go back and paint a portrait. Learning the opposite thing, learning the wrong thing, can sometimes be even more valuable. And I don't know if you guys can see, but like this paint is just like hanging off of the canvas. It is like downright three-dimensional at this point. Let's see if I can kick this off real quick. Can you guys kind of see like how thick and goopy that paint is? Right? It is like hanging off of that canvas. Let it, right? Just cake it on, who cares? Right? Now, even though this is super abstract, right? Even though this is abstract, it still is clearly got a light source. It's a little chunky looking. Maybe it doesn't look like a shrub yet. Maybe I want something smaller. So let's get a smaller little palette knife. Now I can kind of get in a little bit closer, grab some of that lighter color. Maybe I want to mix in just a hint of white. Get like a really bright kind of dull pastel green. And again, scoop a lot, go heavy with it. And just kind of, when you're brushing, almost like you're frosting a cake. I'm barely touching, right? And it's gonna allow the paint to kind of stick to that canvas. I'm scooping a whole lot, and I'm just barely touching, right? And you'll find very quickly you'll get different effects. So like right now, I'm barely touching, and you can see it's kind of just sticking ever slightly. I'm getting this kind of like crackly effect. Because I'm not really pushing on the paint. The paint's just kind of naturally sticking on its own accord. See, it's kind of like that. Totally. It is gonna, what she was saying, it's gonna be really hard to paint this background, right? I now have to paint around my shrub, right? Now there's two different ways to go about this. A, if this happens to you, sometimes it does. If this happens to you, don't sweat it. Literally paint your background and don't be afraid if you go over top of your shrub, right? Then let it dry, mix up some more green, and repaint your shrub over top, right? So the background comes down, I slap my shrub back on top, and everything's good. Do not try and paint around stuff in the foreground, okay? So the best way to go, the thing that I did not do, the best way to go, start in the background, as far, far back as you possibly can. If I'm thinking, okay, it's a sunset, there's some trees in the background, there's a little lake, and there's a shrub. I'm gonna break that down in my brain and say, okay, sunset, trees, maybe like a rolling hill or like a mountain or something, right? Lake, shrub. So I've got 5 layers, right? Paint just the background, just the sunset. Walk away, let it dry. Come back. Paint just the trees on top of the sunset. Walk away, let it dry. Come back. Paint just the, maybe the rolling hill or maybe the lake. Walk away, let it dry. Come back, paint just the shrub, just the foreground earth. Walk away, let it dry. Does that kind of make sense? Okay? What if there's a big tower right behind this thing? Okay. Then I need to do the shadow side. Same thing, light gray. This time way more black for like the shadowy side of things. Maybe there's a little bit of red in there too, why not? Don't be afraid to use your colors. Don't stick with just, you know, plain basic stuff, right? All right, get some dark gray on there. Come over in the other direction, pull it away. Right? That's just a plain old boring cube, right? Nothing really fancy to it, but what happens whenever I start, maybe there's some lights on in this building. I'm gonna take a little bit of white, maybe a hint of red. Maybe there's a couple lights shining. A little bit of blue maybe.